All right, so I got a really important story here that is just giving us yet another reason why we need to urgently remove the profit motive and the profit incentives from our healthcare and big pharmaceutical industries. So, basically, as coronavirus is going to develop over time, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that people have that once we get to like herd immunity with the vaccines, that's going to be it and COVID is going to disappear. That's not really what's going to happen. The best case scenario that we can hope for is turning COVID basically into the flu, where if you didn't know, every single year when you get the flu shot, hopefully you get the flu shot. But basically every single year the flu shot is different because there are different variants and they need to adjust the formulas that they're using for these vaccines. That's basically going to be the case with COVID as well in the future. Is you're not just going to get one shot and that's going to be it for the rest of your life. We might need to do yearly shots. It might need to be booster shots for different variants, etc., etc. And that's sort of how COVID is going to play out. And so with that in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. It's something we could adjust to. But the problem comes in when you have the profit motive. And so we got good reporting here from Li Fong, who's pointing out that Big Pharma is quietly planning a price hike for COVID vaccines in the near future. Okay, so let's go ahead and read some of the details about how fucked up these big pharmaceutical companies are, trying to rip off not just here in the United States where our privatized healthcare system will allow them to, but also globally, as we've been also seeing the unfolding of a global vaccine apartheid where wealthier nations are getting way better and more exclusive access to the vaccines, while the United States and other wealthy countries are simultaneously holding up these patents and ensuring that developing countries are not able to produce the vaccine effectively and efficiently. So let's go ahead and read some of the details of this. So eager to capitalize on the lasting presence of coronavirus, executives at Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, and Pfizer, the pharmaceutical corporations that supplied the COVID-19 vaccines approved for use in the United States, are quietly planning to hike prices on doses in the near future once they decide the pandemic is over, The Intercept's Li Fong reported Thursday. Although the rapid development of the coronavirus vaccines made possible by large infusions of public resources has given big pharma companies a boost in goodwill, the public is still sensitive to drug pricing, and the reputational risk has so far curtailed their ability to reap large financial rewards. But Feng noted that but the environment they hope will change once the pandemic ends, a date that drug makers themselves are reserving the right to declare. So they're waiting for the pandemic to be over, or I guess slow down in that sort of way, before they start ripping us off even more. Many epidemiologists expect the coronavirus to become endemic, and as COVID-19 mutations continue to spread and booster shots may be required on a regular basis, leaders from 3 companies are enthusiastic about cashing in. As this shifts from pandemic to endemic, we think there's an opportunity here for us, Pfizer's chief financial officer Frank D'Amelio said during a recent healthcare conference sponsored by Barclays Bank. The potential need for booster shots, D'Amelio added, provides a significant opportunity for our vaccine from a demand perspective, from a pricing perspective, given the clinical profile of the vaccine. Notice how he frames this discussion. All right, this is why these people are so evil. Okay, he frames the entire discussion as if not that it has anything to do with public health, not that the goal should be to vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible, so that we save lives. Nothing about the morality of it. It's just pure numbers on a screen for them. That's all that this is. It's just calculations that they can make. How much can we rip people off? What are the margins that we can slip by on to rip people off as much as possible globally so that we can profit as much? And they completely disregard the other factors that should be weighed in this decision, which really the profit motive, again, should not be a factor, period. Okay? Should not be a factor, period, end of story. The profits of these companies, okay, again, like Li Fong pointed out there, they've been subsidized, okay? They've been subsidized by governments from the United States government to Germany's government, all across the world. So it's not as if and even if that was the case, that it was just these pharmaceutical companies who were producing and distributing the vaccines, even then it wouldn't be acceptable for these to be driven by profit motives, okay? It doesn't even make sense from an economic perspective. Because our economies, believe it or not, we have an intertwined economic global system. And so if you don't vaccinate the developing countries and you only vaccinate the wealthy countries, well, then guess what? The COVID is going to continue to spread around the world, and we're going to keep seeing variants pop up. Sometimes they're going to be more effective or more resistant to the vaccines, and we're never going to get rid of COVID, and you're going to continue to see the economic downturn globally, and the harshest effects are going to go to those most vulnerable in the world. But that's everything that I just said is completely irrelevant to these pharmaceutical producers. All they care about is profits, and that's evident by the way that he framed that discussion. According to Fang, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson have also pledged affordability for their vaccines for the duration of the pandemic, but have indicated to investors that they plan to return to more commercial pricing as early as later this year. Later this year, they plan to return to commercial pricing. Again, whatever the fuck that means. That, okay, let's work the margins to make sure that we can profit more off of other people's suffering. The three companies behind the approved COVID-19 vaccines, which are already poised to be some of the most lucrative drugs of all time, expect to bring billions in profit this year alone. That's true, Fang added, even though the U.S. government, again, like I was just saying, has fully financed the research and development of Moderna and Johnson & Johnson's vaccines, while Pfizer's vaccine was developed in partnership with BioNTech, a company that received nearly $500 million in development assistance from the German government. So these companies are not even taking the risk, right? The main argument that you'll hear in response to people who are for profits in healthcare and big pharmaceutical is they'll say, oh, well, these are the companies, they took the big risk, right? They invested all of that capital up front. They took the big risk, so they should reap the most rewards. That's not even true. That's not even true. And this is the case with many of our medicines that are developed historically, is in many cases, these companies, these corporations, these medicines are subsidized with taxpayer dollars, and then we still are having to pay ridiculous prices because these pharmaceutical companies are trying to make out the back door with giant bags of cash as people are still suffering, as COVID is being denied to developing nations. And that's really the big story that people aren't talking about right now, that I think is completely absurd, because Joe Biden, his administration, the United States government, as well in tandem with European countries and other wealthy developed nations, have been hoarding these vaccines, as well as denying the patents to be available to developing nations. So not only are you not, and I saw one estimate that said that it would cost roughly $25 billion for the United States to vaccinate the entire world. $25 billion. That's about 3% of our annual military budget. 3%. And we could help vaccinate the entire world. But we choose not to do that. Instead, we choose to protect the patents of these big pharmaceutical companies. Why? Because our politicians are completely bought and owned by those pharmaceutical companies. It's that simple. And so we end up with a situation where developing countries that need the vaccine are unable to get it. And people are dying because of that. People are getting sick because of that. So that's the choice that is being made by these wealthy nations, okay? This is vaccine imperialism, if you want to call it that. So just a little bit more details on that. Through its massive army of lobbyists, Big Pharma has been fighting calls to regulate drug prices, as well as the India and South Africa-led proposal, supported by 70% of the U.S. public, but opposed by President Joe Biden and the leaders of other wealthy nations, to temporarily waive the World Trade Organization's patent protections, which currently enable a handful of private companies to monopolize knowledge and technology related to coronavirus tests, treatments, and vaccines. Fang wrote that the Pfizer's CEO, Albert Bourla, told investors during a call, quote, that the company had little to worry about in terms of political opposition. In other words, he knows that Joe Biden is in his pocket, and therefore he knows that the rest of the developed world is also in their pockets. So this is where we are right now. As COVID is going to continue to develop, okay, it's not going to disappear entirely. It's not going to completely go away. So we might have to have a situation where, again, it's not bad in and of itself that we might need yearly booster shots. It's not like I think that these pharmaceutical companies are planning to, they're getting together in secret back rooms and negotiating how long they want the pandemic to end. That's not what I think it is. It would be fine to say, because, again, this is similar to how the regular flu shot works. It'd be fine to say, okay, you're going to need a yearly booster, or, you're going to need some protection from this variant or this variant, and maybe we'll have to do shots over time. That's fine. That is 100% fine. The problem is the profit motive. The problem is that these gigantic pharmaceutical companies are now looking at the pandemic and future endemic as an opportunity for them, not as something where we should prioritize public health, not as something where we should prioritize trying to save lives. None of that. Just pure profits. That's it. And so, again, this all in all, this entire story is just to remind you that we need to nationalize Big Pharma. The profit motive does not belong anywhere near big pharmaceutical companies or anywhere near the pharmaceutical development and distribution, as well as the healthcare industry itself.